Welcome to Masechet Sukka Daf Bet. We're going to summarize the first big sugya in Masechet Sukka very quickly, very easily. Basically, the Mishnah states, according to Tanakama, a very tall sukkah is not kosher, no good. And there are three opinions in the Gemara why that is, that it's not kosher. Each opinion explains themselves, quotes a pasuk to support their position, and has a reason they don't agree with the other. And it also tells you what they think the meaning of a sukkah is. Very simple. We have Rabba, Rabbi Zera, and Rava. Very easy. Let's start with Rabba. Rabba says, the pasuk says, Leman yadu dorotechem. The mitzvah of sukkah is so that your generations are reminded that God sat you in a sukkah when you left Egypt. By seeing the schach, we're reminded of the story. And if the sukkah is too tall, you're not reminded of the story. Plain and simple. The end. Then after Rabba, we have Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera says, you know what the reason a very tall sukkah is not kosher? Because you're not sitting in the shade of the schach. You're sitting in the shade of the walls. And the pasuk says that the main point of a sukkah is of course the schach, but also that you should sit in the shade of the schach. And since this schach is not providing you with shade, because the walls are so high, they're giving you the shade, you're not really benefiting from the schach. That's why you're not fulfilling the mitzvah. Of course, Abaye then attacks him and says, wait, what about a guy who's sitting in a sukkah between two mountains? And then he's not getting shade from the schach either. And then Rabbi Zera is like, no, what are you talking about? How can you compare a sukkah between two mountains where the structure of the sukkah is absolutely perfect to a sukkah that's so tall that the structure is problematic? So that is Rabbi Zera. The third position is the position of Rava, spelled with an aleph at the end. He says, you know what the main point of a sukkah is? It's to remind you this world is temporary and that you're sitting in a temporary dwelling. Therefore, since a sukkah that's very, very tall is not temporary, nobody builds a sukkah that's more than 20 amot tall for temporary reasons. Therefore, you don't fulfill the mitzvah because it's not temporary, it's permanent, not kosher, because a sukkah needs to remind you of being temporary. Of course, Abaye then attacks and says, wait, what do you mean? When you have metal walls of a sukkah, that's kosher. So why? And it's definitely not temporary when you have metal walls of a sukkah. So why is a tall sukkah not kosher? And then Rava goes on to defend himself, and he's like, yeah, but nobody builds a sukkah that's above 20 that's permanent, that's temporary. And people definitely often build a sukkah that's lower than 20 in a way that is temporary. So it's a question of what's the norm. The norm is that if a sukkah is very tall, it's permanent. So yeah, you're right. There could be a sukkah that's very short, but that's below 20 that has metal walls, but still the actual concept of a sukkah that low is usually it's temporary. Those are the three opinions. Seal that in your memory because that is it. You got it. Those are the positions. Now the question is why each one of those disagrees with the other. Now comes Amud Bet, the second page of this Gemara, which is why each of them disagrees with the others. Why don't they accept each other's opinions? So Rabba is rejected by Rabbi Zera and Rava for a simple reason. It doesn't say that you should know the story of Sukkot at every given moment. It just means that you'll do the mitzvah of Sukkah so that generations remember. It doesn't mean you have to be reminded nonstop every minute you're in the Sukkah. It's just that's talking about generations. And then why don't people agree with Rabbi Zera? Why do Rabba and Rava disagree with Rabbi Zera, who says the main point of the sukkah is the shade? Because the pasuk Rabbi Zera is quoting about the sukkah providing shade and its main purpose being shade. That's a pasuk that is actually speaking about Yemot HaMashiach, the days of Mashiach. So that's not necessary. And why do they both disagree with Rava, who says that it's not temporary enough if it's above 20? Well, because of Abaye's question. They agree with Abaye's question. What about a sukkah with metal walls? That's not kosher either. That is a summary of this sugya. I hope you enjoyed.